A fat, lonely virgin stands trembling at a charity auction, and the whole room laughs when she cries out, "Please, just one night." But when the cold billionaire everyone fears steps forward and says, "Sold," the laughter dies. What starts as a humiliating moment turns into something the world can't stop talking about. He doesn't take her home for pleasure. He takes her home to remind her she deserves respect. Yet behind his calm eyes hides a grief darker than anyone knows. Soon, their quiet dinner sparks a storm that explodes across the internet. A scandal that could destroy them both. But as they're dragged through judgment, something unexpected begins to bloom between two broken souls. He gave her one night of kindness. She gave him back a reason to live. But when the world turns cruel again, will their fragile hearts survive the truth that follows? Or was one night all they were ever meant to have? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Tessa Johnson wiped down the last of the stainless steel counters in the hospital cafeteria. Her arms ached from hours of stirring massive pots and lifting heavy trays. But she kept working, determined to leave everything spotless for tomorrow's shift. The hairnet itched against her scalp, and beads of sweat trickled down her neck, despite the industrial-strength air conditioning. Just one more section, she whispered to herself, a habit born from years of working alone in the early morning hours or late at night. The quiet helped her think, helped her feel less lonely in the vast kitchen space. The piece shattered as her elbow knocked against a stack of metal trays. They crashed to the floor with a deafening clatter that seemed to echo through the entire cafeteria. Tessa's cheeks burned as laughter erupted from the break room where the other kitchen staff were finishing their shifts. "There goes St. Tessa again," Carol's sharp voice carried across the room. "Too busy praying to watch where she's going." "More like too big to maneuver properly," Jake added, his words dripping with cruel amusement. "No wonder she can't find a man who'd want to navigate around all that." Tessa's hands trembled as she bent to pick up the scattered trays. The metal was cold against her fingers, each piece feeling heavier than the last. She tried to block out their words, tried to remember what her mama always said about cruel people having the most hurt inside themselves, but the tears still threatened to fall. "Y'all need Jesus," she muttered under her breath, stacking the trays with careful precision. It wasn't the clever comeback she wished she could deliver, but it was honest. And honesty was all she had most days. The drive home in her aging Toyota felt longer than usual. Atlanta traffic crawled along as the setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded her of the peach cobbler she'd made for Sunday's church potluck. Even that memory couldn't lift her spirits tonight. Her apartment building stood tired and worn against the darkening sky, paint peeling around the windows like old mascara after a good cry. Tessa climbed the 3 flights of stairs slowly, her work shoes squeaking against the linoleum. The sound reminded her of all the times she'd been told she was too loud, took up too much space, needed to make herself smaller. Inside her apartment, the familiar smell of lavender air freshener welcomed her. It wasn't much, just one bedroom with furniture she'd collected from thrift stores and yard sales over the years. But it was hers. The floral curtains her mother had sewn before passing 5 years ago hung in the windows, faded but still cheerful. A worn but clean sofa faced the small television she'd saved 3 months to buy. Tessa sank into the couch cushions, kicking off her shoes with a sigh of relief. She reached for the remote, needing something to fill the silence that sometimes felt like it might swallow her whole. The local news flickered to life, and suddenly she sat up straighter, her attention caught by the handsome face filling the screen. Marcus Reed stood at a podium, his silver-streaked dark hair perfectly styled, his charcoal suit probably worth more than her entire wardrobe. But it was his eyes that held her attention. They carried a sadness that seemed familiar, somehow, like looking in a mirror and seeing your own pain reflected back. The upcoming charity auction, the reporter was saying, will feature Atlanta's most eligible bachelor offering an evening of his company to the highest bidder. All proceeds will benefit local women's shelters. Tessa leaned forward, her heart beating faster as she watched Marcus Reed speak about his passion for helping others. His voice was gentle but firm, carrying authority without arrogance. Every person deserves to feel safe, valued, and seen, he said, and something in Tessa's chest tightened at those words. Without quite meaning to, she found herself walking to her bedroom, where an old cookie tin sat on top of her dresser. Inside was her savings, $1,200 she'd been setting aside for emergencies, dollar by dollar for the past 2 years. Her hands shook as she counted the money again, though she knew exactly how much was there. "I must be crazy," she whispered, but she was already reaching for her laptop. The auction website loaded slowly, each second making her heart race faster. The registration form looked intimidating with its fields for contact information and bid amounts. Tessa's cursor hovered over the submit button. "This is for the shelter," she told herself firmly, though her heart knew better. She volunteered there twice a month, serving meals and offering whatever comfort she could to the women and children seeking refuge. But tonight, looking at her savings and thinking about Marcus Reed's words about being seen, she admitted the truth to herself. Standing up, Tessa moved to the full-length mirror hanging on her closet door. The woman who looked back at her was soft and round, with kind eyes and skin the color of rich coffee with just a touch of cream. Her work uniform did nothing for her figure, and her hair was still flattened from the hairnet she'd worn all day. "Please, God," she whispered, her reflection mouthing the words with her. "Let me be seen tonight." Her voice caught on the last word, thick with hope and fear, and something that felt like courage. The words hung in the air like a prayer, like a wish, like the beginning of something she couldn't quite name. Her finger clicked the submit button before she could change her mind, and just like that, her savings became a bid for one evening where she might finally step out of the shadows and into the light. She stood there for a long moment, staring at her reflection, wondering if she was brave or foolish or maybe both. But underneath the doubt and anxiety, a tiny spark of excitement flickered to life. For once in her life, Tessa Johnson wasn't just going to watch life happen from the sidelines. She was going to step onto the dance floor, even if she didn't know the steps, even if she had to dance alone. The city lights twinkled outside her window, and somewhere out there, Marcus Reed was probably in his penthouse office, unaware that a hospital cook had just bet everything she had on the chance to be noticed by him. Tessa touched the mirror gently, as if blessing her own reflection. "Time to be brave," she whispered, and for once she almost believed it. As she turned away from the mirror, her gaze fell on the empty cookie tin that had held her savings. It seemed to mock her now, but she straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin. Whatever happened next, she had taken a step towards something different, something more. Whether it led to disappointment or joy remained to be seen, but at least she would know she had tried. The evening settled around her apartment like a comfortable blanket, and Tessa began her nightly routine, though her mind kept drifting to the auction and what might come of it. She had just bet her entire savings on a dream, but somehow, instead of panic, she felt peace. Whatever happened, she had chosen to believe in possibility, and that felt like its own kind of victory. The grand ballroom of the Atlanta luxury hotel sparkled like a jewel box, crystal chandeliers casting golden light over marble floors and silk-draped tables. Tessa Johnson stood just inside the entrance, her hands clasped tightly together to hide their trembling. Her thrift store navy blue dress, carefully steamed and altered, felt suddenly inadequate among the designer gowns that swirled around her like exotic butterflies. She touched the modest pearl pendant at her throat, a gift from her grandmother, drawing comfort from its familiar smoothness. The dress had been a miracle find, classic lines, good fabric, and only $35. She'd spent hours watching YouTube videos to learn how to style her hair into the elegant updo that now framed her face. A waiter glided past with a tray of champagne flutes. Tessa took one, mostly to have something to do with her hands. The bubbles tickled her nose as she sipped, trying to look like she belonged among Atlanta's elite. Around her, conversation sparkled, as brightly as the jewelry that dripped from throats and wrists. "Did you see the guest list?" A woman in a red sequined gown stage whispered to her companion. "The starting bid is $5,000. Tessa's heart sank. 5,000? She hadn't known about any starting bid. Her entire savings of $1,200 suddenly felt like pocket change. But she was here now, and she refused to leave without at least trying. The crowd's murmur rose as Marcus Reed entered the ballroom. Tessa's breath caught. He was tall, his presence commanding even from across the room. His tailored black suit fit perfectly over broad shoulders, and his silver-touched dark hair was neatly styled. But it was his expression that held her attention, controlled, distant, as if he wore isolation like armor. The auction began with great ceremony. The host, a local celebrity whose name Tessa couldn't recall, took the stage with flourish. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our charity auction. Tonight, one lucky bidder will win an evening of companionship with none other than Marcus Reed himself. All proceeds benefit our city's women's shelters." Marcus stood to polite applause, offering a slight smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. The bidding started at $5,000, just as Tessa had overheard. Her heart pounded as she watched hands rise around the room. 7,000! 8,000! 10,000! The numbers climbed higher and higher. Tessa's palms grew sweaty around her champagne glass. This was madness. She should leave now, preserve what dignity she had left. But something kept her rooted to the spot, the same something that had made her come in the first place. The bidding began to slow at $15,000. The host's voice rang out, "Going once." Tessa's hand shot up before she could stop herself. $1,200! Her voice wavered, but carried across the suddenly silent room. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds before the snickers began. Tessa felt her cheeks burn as heads turned in her direction. A woman dripping in pearls leaned toward her friend, voice carrying clearly. She must be joking. More whispers followed, cutting like tiny knives. "Who let her in? Is this some kind of joke?" The nerve. Tessa wanted to disappear, to melt into the marble floor beneath her feet. But she remembered all the times she'd stayed quiet, all the times she'd let others make her feel small. Not tonight. Tonight she would stand her ground. She lifted her chin and kept her hand raised, even as it trembled. She focused on Marcus Reed, who was watching her with an unreadable expression in his grey eyes. The host cleared his throat, clearly unsure how to handle the situation. He looked to Marcus, who gave a slight nod. "Sold," the host declared, his voice bouncing off the high ceiling. "To Ms. Tessa Johnson for $1,200. The room fell completely silent. Tessa could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. The crowd parted like the Red Sea as Marcus Reed made his way toward her, his expression still impossible to read. He stopped directly in front of her, and Tessa had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the subtle thread of silver at his temples. He was even more handsome than he appeared in photographs, but it was the quiet intensity in his eyes that held her captivated. Marcus extended his hand to her, and Tessa placed her trembling fingers in his warm grasp. His touch was gentle but firm, steadying her. "Ms. Johnson," he said, his voice low and clear, carrying easily through the silent room. "I look forward to our evening together." The simple courtesy in his words, the respect in his tone, washed over Tessa like a healing balm. The snickers and whispers died away completely. In that moment, she stood tall, feeling truly seen for the first time in years. Camera flashes erupted around them, the bright lights momentarily blinding her. Reporters who had been quietly documenting the event suddenly surged forward, their questions overlapping. "Mr. Reed, what are your thoughts on the unexpected turn of events?" "Ms. Johnson, what made you bid tonight?" "Mr. Reed, will you honor the significantly lower bid?" Tessa blinked against the flashing lights, still holding Marcus's hand, aware that this moment would be plastered across tomorrow's papers and social media. She could already imagine the headlines, the cruel jokes, the assumptions people would make about a plus-size black woman daring to bid on an evening with one of Atlanta's most eligible bachelors. But right now, none of that mattered, because Marcus Reed was still holding her hand, his thumb brushing once, reassuringly, across her knuckles before he released her. His quiet dignity had transformed what could have been her moment of greatest humiliation into something entirely different, something that felt remarkably like triumph. The cameras continued to flash, capturing what would soon become a viral sensation: the fat virgin and the billionaire. But in that moment, Tessa Johnson stood straight and proud, her grandmother's pearl warm against her throat, her heart full of an emotion she couldn't quite name. Something between terror and joy, between defiance and hope. The sleek black car glided through Atlanta's evening traffic, its tinted windows shielding Tessa from curious onlookers. She sat with her hands folded in, her lap, stealing glances at Marcus Reed's profile as he drove. The silence between them felt thick with unspoken questions. "I hope you don't mind," Marcus said, his voice gentle as he navigated a turn. "I made arrangements at La Vue for dinner." Tessa's eyes widened. La Vue was one of Atlanta's most exclusive restaurants, famous for its rooftop dining and panoramic city views. That's very kind of you, Mr. Reed." "Marcus," he corrected, a small smile touching his lips. "I think we can drop the formalities after you bid on me." A blush warmed Tessa's cheeks. "I'm sorry about that. I know it wasn't what anyone expected." "Don't apologize," he said firmly. "Your bid might have been smaller in dollars, but it felt more genuine than any other I've received." They pulled up to the restaurant, where a valet waited. Marcus came around to open Tessa's door, offering his hand. She took it, trying to ignore how her heart fluttered at the contact. Her navy blue dress suddenly felt inadequate against the restaurant's elegant facade. The maitre d' greeted them with a bow. "Mr. Reed, Ms. Johnson, welcome. Your private section is ready." Tessa gasped softly as they stepped onto the rooftop. The entire space had been cleared of other diners. Twinkling lights strung overhead mimicked the stars, and the Atlanta skyline sparkled beyond the glass barriers. A single table waited, set with fine china and crystal glasses. Marcus pulled out her chair, waiting until she was settled before taking his own seat. A waiter appeared immediately with water and menus. "I hope you don't mind," Marcus said, "but I took the liberty of asking the chef to prepare several courses, unless you have any preferences." Tessa shook her head, still overwhelmed by the setting. "No, I trust your judgment." The first course arrived, a delicate soup, that made Tessa close her eyes in appreciation. "This is amazing," she murmured. "You would know," Marcus said, surprising her. "The host mentioned you're a cook at Grady Memorial." "Yes," she replied, touched that he'd remembered, "though what I make isn't quite like this." "Tell me about your work," he said, leaning forward slightly. Tessa hesitated, then found herself speaking about her daily routine in the hospital kitchen, about trying to bring comfort through food to people who were sick or worried about loved ones. "And on weekends," she added, "I volunteer at Hope's Haven shelter. The women there, they need more than just food. They need to know someone cares." Marcus's expression softened. "You cook there too?" "When I can. Sometimes just having a warm meal that someone made with love. It can make a difference." She ducked her head. "I know it sounds silly." "It doesn't sound silly at all," Marcus said quietly. "Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness leave the deepest marks." Something in his tone made Tessa look up. Pain flickered across his face before he masked it. "I lost my wife and daughter 5 years ago," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Car accident. After that, I threw myself into work, into charity. But sometimes I wonder if I'm really helping anyone or just trying to fill the void they left." Tessa's heart ached for him. Without thinking, she reached across the table and touched his hand. "I'm so sorry," she said softly. "I can't imagine that pain." He turned his hand over, briefly squeezing her fingers before letting go. "Caroline, my wife, she would have liked you. She believed in the power of simple kindness, too." The evening continued, course after exquisite course, their conversation flowing more easily now. They shared stories of loss and hope, of small victories and quiet dreams. Tessa found herself telling him things she'd never told anyone, about growing up always being the biggest girl in class, about learning to find worth in helping others when she couldn't find it in herself. As dessert arrived, Marcus studied her face. "May I ask you something personal?" Tessa nodded, though her heart quickened. "Earlier, at the auction, someone mentioned... They called you..." He paused, searching for words. "The fat virgin?" Tessa supplied, her voice steady despite the old shame rising in her throat. "It's true. Both parts. I haven't even been kissed." She expected to see pity in his eyes, but instead found something that looked like admiration. "That just means your heart's still pure," he said softly. "In this world, that's rare and precious." Tears pricked at Tessa's eyes. No one had ever made her feel like her inexperience was something valuable rather than pathetic. The evening drew to a close too quickly. Marcus drove her home, the car filled with a comfortable silence. When they reached her apartment building, he walked her to the door. "You asked for one night," he said, his grey eyes serious in the dim porch light. "I hope it was enough to remind you you're worth more than you believe." Tessa couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. She managed a nod, fumbling with her keys. Marcus waited until she was safely inside before leaving. Tessa leaned against her closed door, listening to his footsteps fade away. Only then did she let the tears fall, not the familiar tears of shame and loneliness, but tears of gratitude. For one magical evening, someone had truly seen her, had valued her story, had treated her with dignity instead of dismissal. She touched her grandmother's pearl necklace, still warm against her throat, and whispered a quiet thank you to heaven for answered prayers. Sometimes being seen was enough to change everything. Sunlight filtered through Tessa's threadbare curtains, warming her face. For a moment she lay still, savouring the memory of last night, the way Marcus had listened, really listened, treating her with a respect she'd rarely known. Then her phone buzzed again, as it had been doing all morning, and reality crashed in. Reaching for her bedside table, she grabbed her phone. Her eyes widened at the screen. 37 missed calls, over 50 text messages, and hundreds of social media notifications. Her hands trembled as she opened the first link. There it was, her moment of victory at the auction, captured in stark digital clarity. The headline made her stomach clench. The Fat Virgin's one-night wish. Below the photo, comments scrolled endlessly. Who does she think she is? This is so sad, desperate much? Look at the size of her next to him. But among the cruelty, other voices spoke. She's so brave. Y'all are just jealous she had the courage to go for it. Look at how he's holding her hand. That's respect. Tessa set the phone down, her breathing shallow. She'd known there would be talk, but this was overwhelming. Her phone buzzed again. Another news site had picked up the story. The notifications kept coming, a steady stream of judgment from strangers who thought they knew her story. In her tiny kitchen, she mechanically made tea, trying to steady her nerves. The morning sun caught her grandmother's pearls, still lying on the dresser where she'd carefully placed them last night. Their soft gleam reminded her of Marcus's words. That just means your heart's still pure. Her phone rang again. This time it was her supervisor at the hospital. Tessa, honey, are you okay? We've got reporters asking about you. Reporters? Tessa's voice cracked. At the hospital? Don't you worry about work. Take today off. And Tessa, I'm proud of you, girl. You showed real courage. Tears pricked at her eyes. Thank you, Miss Beverly. Throughout the morning, more messages poured in. Her sister called, worried. Old school friends reached out. Even her mother, who usually only called on holidays, left a voicemail. Baby, why didn't you tell me about this auction? Are you okay? Around noon, her phone lit up with breaking news. Marcus Reed's PR team was holding a press conference. Tessa's heart stopped. This was it. He would distance himself, say it was just charity, just business. She couldn't blame him. Who would want their name linked to the Fat Virgin? But when Marcus stepped up to the microphone, his expression was stern, his voice clear and firm. Ms. Johnson is a woman of grace and courage. Mockery of her is mockery of kindness itself. She works tirelessly at both her hospital job and volunteer position, serving others without seeking recognition. If society finds her act of participating in a charity auction worthy of ridicule, perhaps we should examine our own values, not her character. Tessa pressed her hand to her mouth, tears flowing freely now. He hadn't just defended her, he'd elevated her. The internet's tone began to shift. New hashtags emerged. Tessa Strong. Kindness wins. Real beauty. Women started sharing their own stories of feeling invisible, of finding courage, of choosing kindness over bitterness. By late afternoon, Tessa felt steady enough to head to Hope's Haven for her regular volunteer shift. The shelter's familiar walls welcomed her, the kitchen's warmth embracing her like an old friend. She tied on her apron, losing herself in the rhythm of chopping vegetables for soup. The shelter residents gathered around as she worked, their presence supportive rather than intrusive. Maria, a young mother of two, touched her arm. We saw you on the news, Tessa. You're an inspiration. Me? Tessa stirred the soup, embarrassed. I just bid at an auction. No, said Eleanor, an elderly resident. You showed us that we deserve to be seen, that our size, our past, our circumstances don't define our worth. Other women nodded, sharing their own stories of feeling invisible, of wanting to be valued. The kitchen filled with conversation and laughter, the soup simmering as hearts opened. Then the shelter's director appeared in the doorway, looking flustered. Tessa, you have a visitor. Her heart jumped when Marcus stepped into the kitchen, impeccable in his suit despite the humid evening. The room fell silent. "Mrs. Johnson," he said formally, then softened. "Tessa, may we talk?" Panic fluttered in her chest. This was it. He'd come to apologize, to offer money to make up for the media circus. She braced herself for pity. "Of course," she managed, untying her apron with trembling fingers. They stepped into the shelter's small office, closing the door on curious eyes. Marcus didn't sit. Instead, he stood by the window, looking out at the shelter's small garden. "I've been thinking about our conversation last night," he began. "About how you understand what people need, not just what they want." Tessa waited, confused. He turned to face her. "My foundation is opening new shelters across the city. We have architects, designers, all the best money can buy. But what we don't have is someone who understands how to make these spaces feel like home." He paused. "I want to hire you to design our kitchens." "Me?" Tessa's voice came out as a whisper. "But I don't have any training." "You have something better," Marcus said quietly. "You have experience. You know what these women need. I don't. You understand how a kitchen can be more than just a place to cook. It can be a sanctuary, a place of healing." Tessa stood very still, her mind racing. This wasn't pity. This was recognition. He saw value in her experience, in her understanding of how food and kindness could heal broken spirits. She began, then stopped, overwhelmed by the possibility before her. Marcus waited patiently, his grey eyes kind but not pitying. The evening light softened his features, reminding her of how he'd looked last night when she'd told him about her work at the shelter. Tessa looked around the small office, at the worn furniture and faded walls, then back at Marcus. Hope, tentative but real, bloomed in her chest as she considered his offer. Sunlight streamed through the thin curtains of Tessa's tiny apartment as she paced back and forth, her sock-covered feet wearing an invisible path in the carpet. Her phone lay silent on the coffee table, but the messages from earlier still echoed in her mind. She'd barely made it through her morning shift at the hospital. The whispers had followed her everywhere, from the locker room to the kitchen line. Even Jimmy, usually the kindest of her co-workers, had caught her arm as she was checking the lunch portions. "Watch yourself, Tessa," he'd said, his face creased with concern. "Rich guys like that, they're just using you for publicity. Once the cameras stop flashing, you'll be yesterday's news." Maria from accounting had been even more direct. "Girl, he's playing you. Nobody goes from charity case to business partner overnight." Their words stung, but what hurt more was the kernel of doubt they planted. Was this all just a publicity stunt? Was Marcus Reed, with his billions and his influence, just using her to polish his image? Tessa stopped at her window, pressing her forehead against the cool glass. The view wasn't much, just the brick wall of the neighboring building, but it had been home for 8 years. Safe, predictable, the complete opposite of what Marcus was offering. Her phone buzzed and her heart jumped, but it was just Gloria, her mentor from the shelter, asking if she could stop by. 20 minutes later, Gloria's familiar knock echoed through the apartment. "Child, you look like you've been running marathons in your mind," Gloria said as she entered, her silver hair neat despite the humidity. She settled onto Tessa's worn couch, patting the space beside her. "Come sit with me." Tessa sank down, the familiar scent of Gloria's lavender perfume wrapping around her like a comfort blanket. "I don't know what to do, Gloria. Everyone at work thinks I'm being naive." Gloria's warm brown eyes studied her face. "And what do you think?" "I think—" Tessa hesitated, twisting her hands in her lap. "I think I'm scared. What if they're right? What if this is just charity?" "Mm-hmm." Gloria nodded slowly. "And what if it's not? What if it's something else entirely?" "What do you mean?" Gloria reached for Tessa's hands, stilling their nervous movement. Baby girl, sometimes God doesn't just open doors, he kicks them down. Sometimes what looks like charity to the world is actually a calling. A calling? Tessa's voice wavered. You've been feeding people's bodies and souls in that shelter kitchen for years. Maybe it's time to do it on a bigger scale. Gloria squeezed her hands. The question isn't whether Marcus Reed is using you. The question is, are you ready to use the gifts God gave you? Before Tessa could respond, another knock echoed through the apartment. Through the peephole, she saw Marcus standing in the hallway. But this wasn't the Marcus from the auction or the news. This Marcus wore faded jeans and a white button-down shirt with rolled-up sleeves, looking more like a regular person than a billionaire. When she opened the door, he smiled apologetically. I hope I'm not interrupting. Gloria stood, gathering her purse. Not at all. I was just leaving. She paused beside Marcus on her way out, fixing him with a steady look. You take care of our girl now, you hear? Yes, ma'am, Marcus replied, and something in his tone made Tessa's heart flutter. Once Gloria left, Marcus turned to Tessa. I thought maybe we could head to the shelter. It's dinner prep time, and I'd like to help. You want to help serve meals? Tessa blinked in surprise. If you'll teach me, he said simply. At the shelter, Tessa found herself directing Marcus Reed, billionaire philanthropist, on the proper way to dice onions. His technique was terrible, but his focus was intense. Like this? He asked, adjusting his grip on the knife. Better, she said, trying not to smile at his determination. But watch your fingers. They worked side by side in the kitchen, him following her lead as she prepared a hearty stew. The residents did double takes when they saw Marcus serving meals, but his quiet presence and rolled-up sleeves seemed to put them at ease. As the dinner rush wound down, Marcus helped her wipe down the counters. You're good at this, he said quietly. Not just the cooking, the way you make everyone feel welcome, feel valued. Tessa focused on a particularly stubborn spot on the counter. It's not hard to be kind. No, but it's rare to be kind without wanting anything in return. He set down his cloth, turning to face her. That's why I'm not offering pity, Tessa. I'm asking for partnership. Your experience, your understanding of what people need, that's valuable. She met his eyes, seeing nothing but sincerity in their grey depths. I'm afraid, she admitted softly. What if I fail? A small smile tugged at his lips. Failure's better than never trying. That night, long after Marcus had left, Tessa sat cross-legged on her bed, her journal open in front of her. The pages were filled with years of prayers, hopes, and dreams she'd never dared speak aloud. But tonight felt different. Her pen moved across the page. Maybe this isn't about being seen by him. Maybe it's about seeing myself. She wrote until her hand cramped, pouring out her fears and hopes, her doubts and dreams. When she finally looked up, the first hints of dawn were painting the sky in soft pinks and purples. With trembling fingers, she picked up her phone and dialed Marcus's number. He answered on the second ring, his voice alert despite the early hour. I'll take the job, she said softly, her voice steady despite her racing heart. The silence that followed felt like a prayer, like a moment suspended between what was and what could be. Then Marcus spoke, his voice warm with something that sounded like pride. Welcome aboard, partner. Through her window, the sunrise painted the brick wall across the way in shades of gold, transforming the ordinary view into something beautiful, just like her life. Tessa thought, watching the light spread across the sky. Sometimes all it took was a different perspective to see the beauty that was there all along. The morning sun painted long shadows across the empty warehouse floor as Marcus's silver Mercedes pulled into the gravel lot. Tessa sat in the passenger seat, her hands folded neatly in her lap, trying to calm her racing heart. The building looked massive from the outside, all red brick and tall windows clouded with years of city grime. "Ready?" Marcus asked, turning off the engine. Tessa nodded, though her stomach was doing somersaults. They walked together to the large metal doors, their footsteps echoing in the quiet morning. Marcus pulled out a set of keys, the jangling sound sharp in the still air. "Before we go in," he said, turning to face her, "I want you to understand something." His grey eyes were serious. "This isn't my project that you're helping with. This is your project that I'm supporting. You know what healing looks like. Build it." The words hit her like a warm wave, making her eyes sting. No one had ever given her this kind of trust before. Inside, sunlight streamed through the dusty windows, illuminating the vast, empty space. Their footsteps echoed off the concrete floors and high ceilings. The warehouse was enormous, easily 5,000 square feet of potential. "It needs work," Marcus admitted, running a hand through his dark hair. "But I think that's part of its charm, like starting fresh." Tessa walked slowly through the space, her mind already racing with possibilities. "We could put the main kitchen here," she said, gesturing to the back wall. "Industrial stoves, prep stations, and over there we could create a dining area that feels like home, not a cafeteria." Marcus followed her, taking notes on his phone as she spoke. "What about this section?" he asked, pointing to a corner near the windows. "A teaching kitchen," Tessa said without hesitation. "Where we can offer cooking classes, job training. Some of the women at the shelter, they've never had the chance to learn these skills." They spent the morning planning, drawing rough sketches on a large whiteboard Marcus had brought. Tessa's confidence grew with each suggestion, each decision. When lunchtime came, Marcus ordered sandwiches from a nearby deli. They sat on folding chairs, surrounded by their plans and dreams. "Tell me about growing up," Marcus said softly, unwrapping his sandwich. "If you want to." Tessa was quiet for a moment, considering. "Foster care isn't what most people think," she finally said. "It's not always terrible. Sometimes it's just empty. Different houses, different rules, different expectations. You learn to make yourself small, unnoticed." Marcus listened intently, his food forgotten. "Is that where you learned to cook?" She nodded, a small smile touching her lips. "My third foster mum, Mrs. Chen, she let me help in the kitchen. Said cooking was love made visible." Her eyes grew distant. "I was with her for 8 months before they moved me again. And now you're creating a place where others can find that same comfort," Marcus said quietly. Over the next few hours, they met with contractors, discussed budgets, and began creating lists of equipment needed. Marcus insisted on top-quality everything, but Tessa kept reminding him about practicality. "These women don't need fancy gadgets," she explained. "They need reliable tools they can actually afford to buy themselves someday." Marcus nodded, crossing items off his list. "You're right. This isn't about showing off. It's about creating something sustainable." As afternoon turned to evening, they started looking at paint samples for the walls. "Nothing institutional," Tessa insisted. "This needs to feel warm, welcoming. Like you," Marcus said softly, then quickly looked away, as if surprised by his own words. They were discussing color schemes when Tessa decided to test out the old stove they'd found in the corner. "It just needs a good cleaning," she said, turning the burner on. "I can make us some soup." The flame caught her by surprise, larger than expected, and she jerked her hand back with a sharp cry of pain. "Tessa!" Marcus was beside her in an instant, grabbing her hand and pulling it toward the sink they'd just had installed. His touch was gentle, but firm as he held her burned hand under the cool water. "I'm fine," she tried to say, but he wasn't listening. "I should have had someone check the gas connection," he muttered, his face tight with concern. "I should have thought—" He broke off, realizing he was still holding her hand, his thumb unconsciously stroking her wrist. Their eyes met, and something electric passed between them. Tessa felt her breath catch in her throat. Marcus's expression softened, vulnerability replacing worry for just a moment before he carefully stepped back. "Keep it under the water," he instructed, his voice slightly rough. "I'll get the first aid kit from my car." While he was gone, Tessa tried to steady her breathing. The burn wasn't bad. She'd had worse in professional kitchens. But the way he'd looked at her, the gentleness of his touch. He returned with supplies, insisting on applying burn cream and carefully wrapping her hand. We can't have our director injured before we even open," he said, stumbling over the words. The soup, forgotten during the commotion, had burned beyond salvation. The acrid smell filled the air, making them both wrinkle their noses. "Well?" Tessa said, looking at the ruined pot. "I guess that's one way to test the ventilation system." Marcus stared at her for a moment, then burst out laughing. A rich, genuine sound that she'd never heard from him before. Tessa joined in, and soon they were both wiping tears from their eyes. "Maybe we should order pizza," she suggested, still giggling. "Probably safer." He agreed, his eyes crinkling at the corners when he smiled. As they sat sharing pizza from the box, surrounded by paint samples and building plans, Tessa caught sight of the project board Marcus had put up earlier. There, in clean black letters, was her name, Director, Tessa Johnson. "Is it real?" she asked suddenly, not quite meaning to speak aloud. Marcus followed her gaze. "As real as you want it to be," he said softly. "You're not just building a kitchen, Tessa. You're building hope." The late evening sun slanted through the windows, turning the dust motes golden. They sat in comfortable silence, surrounded by the beginnings of something neither of them had expected to find. Not just a community kitchen, but a place where broken pieces could come together to make something beautiful. The burnt soup still smelled terrible, but somehow it didn't matter. In that moment, with pizza boxes between them and plans spread out all around, they were just two people laughing at a kitchen mishap, neither realizing that in helping others heal, they had begun to heal themselves. The weeks flowed together like ingredients in one of Tessa's recipes. Each day brought new progress to the community kitchen project, transforming the empty warehouse into something warm and alive. The industrial space slowly shed its cold shell, revealing a heart that beat with purpose and promise. Tessa stood at the newly installed teaching station, surrounded by 5 single mothers who listened intently as she demonstrated how to stretch a grocery budget. Her hands moved with practiced grace, showing them how to turn simple ingredients into nourishing meals. "Remember," she explained, her voice gentle but firm, "buying dried beans instead of canned saves money and gives you more control over the seasoning." She smiled at Maria, a young mother of 2 who was taking careful notes. "And they taste better too." The women had started coming 3 weeks ago, drawn by word of mouth and the promise of free cooking classes. Now they were becoming a family of sorts, sharing stories and support along with recipes. Tessa watched them practice chopping vegetables, her heart swelling with pride at their progress. "Miss Tessa," called out Denise, a former shelter resident. "Mr. Tall and Tender is here again." The nickname made Tessa blush as she turned to see Marcus slipping quietly through the door, carrying boxes of supplies. He came almost daily now, though he tried to stay in the background, helping where needed without drawing attention to himself. The women exchanged knowing looks. They had taken to calling him that after noticing how gently he handled everything from heavy boxes to fragile spirits. The name had stuck, though never to his face. "Ladies?" He greeted them with a small nod, setting down his burden. "Don't let me interrupt your lesson." But they had already paused their cooking, watching with poorly concealed interest as he rolled up his sleeves and began organizing the pantry. Tessa caught snippets of their whispered conversations. The way he looks at her when she's not watching. Never seen a rich man work so hard without being asked. My Jerry could take some lessons in manners from him. Tessa cleared her throat. "All right, let's focus on these meal plans. Remember, we're learning how to feed a family of 4 for under $50 a week." The afternoon progressed, filled with the sounds of chopping, simmering, and laughter. Marcus moved quietly through the space, restocking shelves and occasionally stopping to taste something when invited. The women had gotten used to his presence, no longer intimidated by his wealth or status. Later, after the class had ended and the kitchen was clean, Tessa noticed Marcus hadn't left with the others. The rain outside had picked up, drumming against the roof in a steady rhythm. She found him sitting alone in the small office area, holding a photograph in his hands. The image showed a little girl with his grey eyes and a bright smile, missing her front teeth. His daughter. Tessa had never seen him look so vulnerable, his usual composed facade cracking around the edges. Without a word, she went to the kitchen and returned with 2 bowls of the hearty stew they'd made in class. She set one in front of him, along with a piece of fresh bread. "You don't have to eat alone anymore," she said softly, taking the chair beside him. Marcus stared at the bowl for a long moment, his fingers still tracing the edge of the photograph. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. I haven't been able to pray since it happened," he confessed. "Since the accident, every time I try, the words stick in my throat." Tessa reached across the space between them, her hand covering his. "Then let me pray for both of us tonight." The office was quiet except for the rain and their breathing. Tessa bowed her head, her voice warm and sure in the dim light. "Dear Lord, we thank you for this food and for bringing us together. We ask for healing for broken hearts and hope for tomorrow. Watch over those we've lost and give strength to those left behind. Help us remember that even in our darkest moments, your love never leaves us. Amen." When she finished, Marcus's hand was trembling beneath hers. A tear slipped down his cheek, landing on the photograph. Tessa pretended not to notice, giving him time to compose himself as she broke the bread and shared it between their bowls. They ate in companionable silence, the stew warming them from the inside out. Finally, Marcus spoke again. "Thank you," he said simply, but his eyes held volumes of unspoken gratitude. Tessa smiled, gathering their empty bowls. "Same time tomorrow?" He nodded, carefully tucking the photograph away in his wallet. As she turned to leave, she heard him whisper something that sounded like a prayer of his own. "Please, just one night more like this." The next morning, Tessa arrived early to find an envelope on her desk. Inside was official documentation showing Marcus had doubled the project's funding, ensuring they could expand their programs and help more families. But it was the handwritten note beneath the paperwork that made her heart skip a beat. "You make broken things work again. Marcus." She traced his words with her finger, understanding that he wasn't just talking about the kitchen or the programs or the lives they were helping to rebuild. Some broken things were harder to see, but just as much in need of gentle repair. The morning light streamed through the windows, catching the dust motes in its golden glow. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving everything fresh and clean. Tessa pinned the note to her bulletin board, right next to her director's nameplate, a reminder that healing often came in unexpected ways, through shared meals, quiet prayers, and the courage to let someone else's light shine into your darkness. A gentle breeze carried the scent of fresh paint and new beginnings through the transformed warehouse. 1 month of tireless work had turned the empty space into a beacon of hope. Strings of white lights twinkled overhead, and bouquets of wildflowers decorated every table. The community kitchen gleamed with possibility. Tessa smoothed her navy dress, a new one this time, carefully chosen for the occasion, and watched as people filed in for the grand opening. Her hands trembled as she adjusted the name tag that read, Tessa Johnson, Kitchen Director. The title still felt surreal. The mayor stood at the podium, his voice carrying across the packed room. What we're witnessing today is more than just the opening of a kitchen. It's proof that when compassion meets vision, miracles happen. Tessa caught sight of some of her students from the cooking classes, now employed as staff. They beamed with pride in their crisp white uniforms. Gloria, her mentor from the shelter, gave her an encouraging nod from the front row. Marcus stood quietly at the side of the stage, his tall frame straight and dignified in his charcoal suit. When their eyes met, he smiled. That rare, genuine smile that made his whole face soften. And now, the mayor continued, I'd like to invite Ms. Tessa Johnson to say a few words. The room erupted in warm applause. Tessa's heart hammered as she approached the podium. She unfolded her carefully prepared notes with shaking fingers. I've spent most of my life in kitchens. She began softly, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. And I've learned that a kitchen is more than just a place where we prepare food. It's where we gather, where we share, where we heal. She paused, looking out at the faces before her. Some familiar, some new, all attentive. In this kitchen, we won't just be feeding bellies. We'll be feeding hope. Her voice cracked slightly. Hope that tomorrow can be better. Hope that no one needs to struggle alone. Hope that there's always a place at the table for everyone. The applause that followed was thunderous. Marcus stepped forward, placing a supportive hand on her shoulder. His touch steadied her, as it had so many times over the past month. After the speeches came the tours and the tastings. Tessa's students served samples of their signature dishes, while visitors explored the facility. The mayor praised the efficient layout and sustainable design. Local business owners pledged support. But what touched Tessa most were the whispered thank yous from women who recognized themselves in her story. As the crowd began to thin, Marcus touched her elbow gently. Come with me, he said. There's something I want to show you. He led her through a side door to a hidden garden behind the building. The evening sun cast long shadows across neat beds of roses, some newly planted, others clearly established for years. A wooden bench sat beneath an old oak tree. Sarah loved roses, Marcus said quietly, naming his late wife for the first time in weeks. She started this garden 15 years ago. After the accident, I couldn't bring myself to come here, but last week I had the gardeners restore it. Tessa touched a deep red bloom gently. They're beautiful. Like you, they needed someone to believe in them again. His voice was rough with emotion. Tessa, I've been afraid to care, afraid to let anyone close. But with you, he trailed off, searching for words. Tessa waited patiently, understanding the weight of this moment. With you, I feel peace, he finally said. For the first time in 3 years, I feel peace. Their eyes met in the fading light. Marcus slowly reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. They didn't kiss. They didn't need to. The simple contact of palm against palm said everything that words couldn't. They stood there in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. The roses released their sweet perfume into the evening air, and somewhere nearby, a mockingbird sang. When it was time to leave, Marcus walked her to her car. Their hands remained linked until the last possible moment. "Thank you," Tessa said softly. "For everything." "No," Marcus replied. "Thank you for showing me how to live again." She drove home with a warm glow in her chest, feeling lighter than air. Through her open window, she could hear Mrs. Washington, her elderly neighbor, humming gospel hymns as she watered her window boxes. The familiar sound wrapped around her like a comfortable blanket. Marcus watched her taillights disappear around the corner, his hand still tingling from her touch. "Don't lose this one, Reed," he whispered to himself, his words carrying both prayer and promise into the night air. Back in her apartment, Tessa changed into her comfortable pajamas and settled into bed. Mrs. Washington's gentle hymns drifted through the wall. Amazing Grace, her favorite. Tessa smiled, pulling her blanket up to her chin. For the first time in her life, love didn't feel like an impossible dream. It felt real, tangible, as natural as breathing. She closed her eyes, letting Mrs. Washington's melody carry her toward sleep, her heart full of roses and answered prayers. The moon cast silver light through her window, turning ordinary shadows into something magical. In that peaceful moment between waking and dreaming, Tessa knew that sometimes the best dreams aren't the ones that take you away from reality, but the ones that make reality better than any dream could be. Tessa stared at the cream-colored envelope on her kitchen counter. The elegant gold lettering caught the morning light. The first annual Women of Impact celebration. Her hands trembled as she read the invitation again. "Ms. Tessa Johnson, you are cordially invited to attend." She hadn't known Marcus was planning this. The community kitchen had been open for several peaceful weeks now, settling into a comfortable rhythm. Every day brought new faces, new stories, and new hope. But this felt different. Her phone buzzed with a text from Gloria, her mentor from the shelter. "Got my invitation too. Already picked out my dress. No excuses, honey. You're going." Tessa sank into her worn armchair, clutching the invitation to her chest. The date was set for next Saturday evening at the Grand Meridian Hotel, one of the most prestigious venues in Atlanta. The thought of walking into such a place made her stomach flutter. The week passed in a blur of preparations. Gloria insisted on taking her shopping, steering her away from her usual modest choices toward a deep burgundy gown that hugged her curves before flowing gracefully to the floor. "You're not hiding anymore," Gloria declared, her eyes gleaming with pride. On the evening of the gala, Tessa stood before her mirror, barely recognizing herself. The dress fit perfectly, and she'd arranged her hair in soft curls. A touch of makeup enhanced her natural beauty without overwhelming it. Mrs. Washington from next door had helped her with her makeup, humming hymns the whole time. "Lord have mercy," Mrs. Washington had said, stepping back to admire her work. "You look like a queen." The Grand Meridian's ballroom took Tessa's breath away. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over elegant table settings. Fresh flowers perfumed the air. Women of all ages and backgrounds filled the space, their excited chatter creating a welcoming atmosphere. Gloria waved her over to their table near the front. "You clean up nice," she teased, pulling Tessa into a hug. "Though I haven't seen Marcus yet. Wonder where that man's hiding." Tessa tried to ignore the skip in her heart at his name. They'd grown closer over the past weeks, sharing quiet moments between their busy schedules. Sometimes their hands would brush accidentally on purpose, sending electricity through her fingers. but they'd kept things gentle, undefined. The program began with dinner and speeches from community leaders. Tessa relaxed slightly, enjoying the excellent food and warm company. But then the announcer's voice rang out. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our host for the evening, Mr. Marcus Reed." Marcus stepped onto the stage, handsome in his perfectly tailored tuxedo. His presence commanded attention, but Tessa noticed the softness in his eyes as he surveyed the room. "Good evening," he began. "We're here tonight to celebrate women who've made extraordinary impacts in our community. Women who saw needs and filled them, who turned pain into purpose, who lifted others while climbing themselves." His gaze found Tessa's, and her breath caught. "Our first honoree took $1,200 and turned it into a revolution of kindness." Tessa's world tilted as she realized what was happening. She barely heard the rest of his speech, describing her work at the community kitchen, her mentorship program, the lives she'd touched. The spotlight found her, and the room erupted in applause. Gloria gave her a gentle push. "Go on, honey, you earned this." Somehow, Tessa made it to the stage. Marcus handed her a crystal award, his fingers lingering on hers for just a moment. The weight of it felt surreal in her hands. She hadn't prepared a speech, but looking out at the sea of encouraging faces, words came from her heart. "Thank you," she began softly. "A few months ago I thought being seen meant being judged, but you've shown me that being seen means being valued, being heard means being understood, and being loved. Being loved means being brave enough to let your light shine." More applause followed, but it was too much. After returning to her seat, Tessa slipped away from the table, finding her way to the rooftop garden. The night air cooled her flushed cheeks as tears spilled down her face. The city stretched out below, a tapestry of lights and shadows. She heard the door open behind her, but didn't turn around. "Tessa." Marcus's voice was gentle. "Are you all right?" She wiped her eyes quickly. "I'm sorry, it's just overwhelming. All those people. That beautiful award. I never thought—" "You never thought you deserved it?" He moved closer, his presence warm and steady beside her. "That's why you deserve it most." She turned to face him then, seeing the emotion in his grey eyes. "You arranged all this, didn't you?" He nodded. "But every word was true. Every person in that room has been touched by your work, your heart." He took a deep breath. "Including me." The air between them seemed to vibrate with unspoken feelings. "Tessa," he said softly, "you asked for one night, but you gave me back every sunrise I thought I'd lost. After Sarah and Emily, I thought my heart was finished, but you made me want to live again, to feel again." Tessa trembled, overwhelmed by his words. "Marcus, I'm scared. No one's ever." "Never loved you?" He reached for her hand, holding it carefully like something precious. "Then let's take it slow. We have all the time in the world." She nodded, unable to speak through her tears. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and gently dried her cheeks. "Would you like to dance?" he asked. "They're playing jazz downstairs." Back in the ballroom, the lights had dimmed. A smooth saxophone melody floated through the air. Marcus led her to the dance floor, drawing her close but not too close. They swayed together, their foreheads touching lightly. Other couples danced around them, but Tessa only felt Marcus's steady presence, the warmth of his hand on her waist, the soft brush of his breath against her hair. It felt like redemption, like coming home. Later, driving back to her apartment, the city lights blurred like stars. The lines between friendship and love seemed to blur too, but for once, she wasn't afraid of the uncertainty. In his mansion across town, Marcus stood at his window, looking out at the same night sky. He touched the spot on his forehead where hers had rested, a smile playing at his lips despite his lingering fears. And in her small bedroom, Tessa lay awake, still wearing her beautiful dress, her award-catching moonlight on her dresser. She smiled into her pillow, holding the memory of the dance close to her heart. Two souls, separate but connected, both awake in the quiet hours, both smiling through their fears, both feeling the first tender blooms of something that felt remarkably like hope. 3 perfect days passed like a dream after the gala. Tessa floated through her work at the kitchen, humming gospel tunes while she cooked. Even the fluorescent lights seemed softer somehow, casting a gentle glow over everything she touched. But on the 4th morning, her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. "Have you seen it?" Gloria's voice crackled through the speaker, tight with concern. "Seen what?" Tessa asked, stirring a pot of oatmeal for the morning crowd. "Oh, honey, you better sit down." With trembling fingers, Tessa opened the link Gloria sent. The website Celebrity Whispers filled her screen, dominated by photos from the gala. There she was with Marcus on the rooftop, their hands intertwined. Another showed them dancing, foreheads touching. But it was the headline that made her stomach lurch. "Billionaire's biggest charity case yet, the pity project that went too far." The article twisted everything. Their genuine moments became calculated photo ops. Their connection was painted as a publicity stunt gone wrong. The writer suggested Marcus was using her to boost his image after recent criticism of his foundation's leadership diversity. Cruel memes spread across social media like wildfire. Someone had photoshopped her face onto Cinderella's body with the caption, "Midnight's coming. Better run before the spell breaks." Her phone kept buzzing with notifications. Comment after comment, each one worse than the last. Did he lose a bet? This is what rock bottom looks like for a billionaire. She actually thought he could love her? Tessa's hands shook so badly she had to set down her wooden spoon. Behind her she heard snickering. 2 of her kitchen staff were huddled over a phone, pointing at something on the screen. "At least now we know why he really funded this place," one whispered, not quietly enough. The morning crowd was smaller than usual. When Tessa checked the kitchen's donation page, her heart sank. The steady stream of contributions had slowed to a trickle. Several corporate sponsors had quietly withdrawn their pledges. She waited all morning for Marcus to call, to explain, to fix it somehow. By afternoon, his PR team released a statement. Mr. Reed appreciates the public's interest in his personal life, but requests privacy during this time. He remains committed to the success of all foundation projects. The carefully worded response felt like ice water in her veins. No direct defense of their relationship. No clear denial of the article's claims. Just corporate speak and careful distance. Her phone finally lit up with his name. "Tessa," he said, his voice strained. "I'm so sorry, we're handling it." "Handling it?" She tried to keep her voice steady. "Like a PR crisis." "That's not what I meant. The team thinks—" "The team?" Tessa's voice cracked. "What do you think, Marcus?" The silence stretched between them. "I need to see you," she said finally. "In person." "I have back-to-back meetings until now, Marcus, or are you too busy protecting your image to face me?" 20 minutes later, Tessa marched into his office building. The security guard gave her a look she couldn't read. Pity? Amusement? She kept her chin high as the elevator carried her to the top floor. Marcus's assistant tried to stop her, but Tessa pushed past, bursting into his office where he sat behind his massive desk, phone to his ear. "I'll call you back," he said quickly, standing. "You can face a boardroom, but not the truth?" Tessa's voice shook with anger and hurt. 3 days ago, you said you weren't afraid to feel anymore. Was that just another line for your PR team? Tessa, please. He moved around the desk toward her. This isn't simple. The Foundation's work affects thousands of people. We need to be strategic. Strategic? She stepped back from his reaching hand. I thought I meant more to you than a strategy. You do. But these attacks, they're not just aimed at me. They're threatening everything we've built. The kitchen, the programs. No. Tessa cut him off. What threatens everything is your hesitation, your careful statements, your strategic silence. Tears spilled down her cheeks. You said let's take it slow. I didn't realize that meant keeping one foot out the door. That's not fair. Marcus's voice tightened. I'm trying to protect me, the Foundation, your reputation. Tessa shook her head. You can't protect anything if you're afraid to stand for it. She turned toward the door, then paused. You know what hurts most? I finally believed I deserved to be seen, to be chosen, but you're still hiding, in the shadows of your grief, too scared to step into the light. That night, Tessa's small apartment felt suffocating. The walls seemed to close in with each notification, each cruel comment, each memory of Marcus's hesitation. She pulled out her old duffel bag, the one that had carried her through foster homes and fresh starts. Her hands moved on autopilot, folding clothes, packing essentials. Her aunt in Alabama had been begging her to visit. Maybe now was the time. She wrote 2 notes, one to Gloria, asking her to watch over the kitchen, the other to Marcus, but the words wouldn't come. In the end, she simply wrote, You asked me to be brave enough to let my light shine. I need to find out if it can shine without you. The bus station was quiet at midnight. As she settled into her seat, watching Atlanta's lights fade into darkness, her phone buzzed one last time. Marcus's name lit up the screen, but she turned it off without reading the message. Across town, Marcus stood in the community kitchen, staring at Tessa's empty desk. Her apron still hung on its hook. The faint scent of her vanilla lotion lingered in the air. He picked up a photo from her desk, the 2 of them at the kitchen's opening, both smiling, both believing in something bigger than their fears. You asked for one night. He whispered to the empty room, his voice thick with regret. And I failed to give even that. The words fell into silence, heavy with the weight of everything left unsaid, everything left undone, everything left undefended in the face of the world's cruel judgment. The small diner's bell chimed as another customer walked in. Tessa barely looked up from wiping down the counter, her movements automatic after 3 months of the same routine. The familiar scent of coffee and bacon filled the air in May's Country Kitchen, a modest establishment on the outskirts of Montgomery, Alabama. Order up, called Jimmy, the short-order cook, sliding a plate of scrambled eggs across the pass-through window. Tessa grabbed the plate, her hands not as steady as they used to be. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her uniform hung looser than when she'd first arrived. The regular customers had stopped asking why such a talented cook was working as a waitress. They'd grown used to her quiet presence, her gentle smile that never quite reached her eyes. After her shift, she sat in her aunt's garden, pen hovering over another unsent letter. The paper trembled in her hands. Dear Marcus, today I saw a man in a suit who reminded me of you. He had your height, but not your grace. Sometimes I wonder if you still visit our kitchen. Is someone else teaching those cooking classes now? Do you still eat alone in your office? I hope not. I hope... She stopped writing, folding the paper carefully before adding it to the growing stack in her dresser drawer. 92 letters, 1 for each day since she'd left Atlanta. Her Aunt Martha watched from the kitchen window, worry creasing her forehead. She'd seen Tessa skip meals, heard her crying at night. The spark that had made her niece glow in those newspaper photos was fading. Baby girl, Martha said one evening, setting a plate of untouched dinner aside. You're punishing yourself for something that ain't your fault." Tessa managed a weak smile. "I'm fine, Aunt Martha, just tired." But she wasn't fine. The viral story had followed her even here. Last week, a customer had recognized her, snapping a photo when she thought Tessa wasn't looking. The whispers started again. That's the one. The fat girl who thought she could land a billionaire. Meanwhile, in Atlanta, Marcus sat in his office, staring at spreadsheets without seeing them. The foundation had opened 3 new community kitchens across the city. The press praised his vision, his generosity. But the kitchens felt hollow without Tessa's warmth. His assistant knocked softly. "Mr. Reed, the board meeting starts in 5 minutes." He nodded, straightening his tie. These days he worked 16-hour days, as if burying himself in spreadsheets could fill the void she'd left. The original kitchen still ran smoothly, but the laughter was gone. No one made silly jokes while chopping vegetables. No one hummed gospel songs while stirring soup. Every morning he checked his phone for messages that never came. Every evening he drove past her old apartment building, knowing she wasn't there. His house felt larger, colder. The garden where they'd held hands was overgrown with weeds. Gloria watched all this with growing concern. She saw how both of them were withering, Marcus behind his corporate mask, Tessa in her self-imposed exile. After leading the evening prayer group at the shelter, she sat down to write a letter. "Dear Marcus, I'm writing because someone needs to speak plain truth. Our girl is sick. Martha called me yesterday. Tessa's lost 20 pounds she couldn't afford to lose. She's working herself to exhaustion in that diner, punishing herself for believing she deserved joy. You're not much better, son. I see you haunting that kitchen like a ghost, checking your phone every 5 minutes. You two are breaking each other's hearts from a distance, and for what? Pride? Fear? The opinions of people who've never known real love? The Lord didn't bring you two together for a PR campaign. He brought you together for healing, but healing takes courage. It takes standing in the light, even when shadows feel safer. She's at May's Country Kitchen in Montgomery. Go find her, not as Marcus Reed, the billionaire, but as the man who found his heart again over burnt soup and second chances. With love and prayers, Gloria." The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning. Marcus read it 3 times, his hands shaking. 20 pounds. Exhaustion. Sick. The words hit him like physical blows. He cancelled his meetings for the week. His assistant protested. He had investors flying in from Singapore, a charity gala to host. "Handle it," he said, already loosening his tie. Some things matter more than money. In his private bathroom, he stared at his reflection. The perfectly pressed suit, the carefully styled hair, all armor he'd hidden behind. He thought of Tessa in her simple apron, flour on her cheeks, teaching women to knead bread with more patience than he'd ever shown in a boardroom. He changed into jeans and a plain button-down shirt. No designer labels, no expensive watch. Just a man who'd wasted 3 months trying to protect an image instead of fighting for love. His phone buzzed. Another story about the billionaire's failed romance had gone viral. This time, he didn't call his PR team. Instead, he booked a flight to Montgomery for the next morning. That night, he couldn't sleep. He paced his empty house, remembering every moment with Tessa. Her laugh when he burned the soup. Her tears at the gala when she couldn't believe she deserved recognition. The way her hand felt in his, warm and real and healing. In Alabama, Tessa lay awake too, writing her 93rd letter. "Dear Marcus, today a little girl at the diner asked me why I looked so sad. I didn't know what to tell her. How do you explain that you ran away from love because you were afraid it wasn't real? That you still check the news every day, hoping to see your name, hoping you fought for us, hoping—" She stopped writing. tears blurring the words. Outside, crickets chirped in the warm Alabama night. Her aunt's wind chimes tinkled softly, a lullaby she couldn't hear over her heartbeat. In Atlanta, Marcus packed a small bag. No expensive luggage, no designer clothes, just what he needed to find his way back to her. In his wallet he placed the photo from her desk, the two of them smiling at the kitchen's opening. He sat down at his desk and wrote what he should have said 3 months ago. "Dearest Tessa, you were never my project. You were my miracle, the woman who taught me to pray again, to laugh again, to believe in second chances. I'm coming to find you, not to rescue you, but to ask if you'll rescue me again. Wait for me. Love, Marcus." He sealed the letter but didn't send it. Some words needed to be said in person, eye to eye, heart to heart. As dawn broke over Atlanta, he grabbed his keys, the letter tucked safely in his pocket. "I'm coming," he whispered to the rising sun. "I'm finally coming." The morning sun cast long shadows across May's country kitchen as Marcus pulled into the gravel parking lot. His rental car looked out of place among the rusty pickup trucks and well-worn sedans. The diner's neon "open" sign buzzed faintly, a sound that mixed with the whir of ceiling fans and clinking coffee cups drifting through the screened door. He sat in the car for a long moment, his heart thundering against his ribs. Through the window, he could see movement behind the counter. Someone in a pale blue uniform pouring coffee. His hands tightened on the steering wheel. The bell above the door chimed as he entered, the aroma of coffee and fresh biscuits wrapped around him like a familiar embrace. And there she was, Tessa, her hair tucked beneath a white cap, filling coffee cups with the same gentle care she'd once shown serving soup to the homeless. She looked thinner, just as Gloria had warned. The uniform hung loose on her frame, and shadows lingered beneath her eyes. But her smile, that warm, genuine smile that had first captured his heart, still graced her face as she chatted with an elderly couple at the counter. "Be right with you, sugar," she called without looking up, her voice carrying that musical lilt he'd missed so desperately. Marcus slid onto a counter stool, his throat tight. He watched her move, noting how even here, in this humble diner, she treated every customer like they mattered, just like she'd done at the kitchen in Atlanta. When she finally turned toward him, coffee pot in hand, the recognition froze her in place. The pot trembled slightly, coffee sloshing against glass. "Marcus?" she whispered, barely audible above the radio playing country music in the background. "Hello, Tessa," he said softly. Time seemed to stop. The other customers faded into background noise as their eyes met across the worn Formica counter. 3 months of silence hung between them like a heavy curtain. She started, then stopped, her free hand clutching the edge of the counter. "What are you doing here?" "Gloria wrote to me," he said simply. "She told me where to find you." Tessa set the coffee pot down carefully, her movements measured and controlled. "I'm working," she said, but her voice wavered. "I know. I'll wait." And he did. For 2 hours he sat at that counter, drinking coffee that had grown cold, watching her serve customers with quiet dignity. She moved around him like he was just another patron, but he caught her stealing glances when she thought he wasn't looking. Finally, as the lunch rush wound down, she untied her apron and spoke quietly to an older waitress who nodded sympathetically. Tessa disappeared into the back, emerging a few minutes later in her street clothes, a simple sundress that made his heart ache with its familiarity. "We can talk in the garden," she said, leading him through a side door to a small patch of green behind the diner. 2 wooden benches sat beneath a sprawling oak tree, its leaves rustling in the warm Alabama breeze. They sat in silence for a long moment, the distance between them on the bench feeling like miles. A cardinal landed nearby, its bright red feathers a stark contrast to the weathered wood of the fence. "You look tired," Marcus finally said, his voice gentle. "So do you," she replied, meeting his eyes briefly before looking away. "I should have come sooner," he admitted. "I should have come the day you left. I should have never let you leave at all." Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back. "Why didn't you?" "Because I'm a coward," he said simply. "I've spent so many years protecting myself from pain that I forgot how to fight for joy. When that blogger attacked us, I hesitated. Not because I was ashamed of you, never that, but because I was afraid of failing you, of not being strong enough to shield you from their cruelty." "I didn't need shielding," Tessa said softly. "I needed partnership. I needed you to stand beside me, not in front of me." Marcus reached for her hand, relief flooding through him when she didn't pull away. "I know that now. I should have shouted your worth from the rooftops. Instead, I let my PR team handle it like a business crisis. And I ran away," she acknowledged, her fingers tightening around his. "I've spent my whole life believing I didn't deserve love. When things got hard, it was easier to believe that than to fight for us." A truck rumbled past on the street beyond the garden, its noise fading into the distance. In its wake, the quiet felt deeper, more meaningful. "I'm tired," Tessa whispered. "Tired of running from love, tired of hiding, tired of letting fear win." Marcus turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "Then come home," he said. "Not for me, not for the kitchen. For yourself, because you deserve to claim the life you built, the people who love you, the purpose you found." Tears slipped down her cheeks now, unchecked. "The kitchen probably doesn't even want me back." "The kitchen isn't the same without you," he said. "Your sign is still there, Tessa's table. The women you trained ask about you every day. Even the soup tastes different." A small laugh escaped through her tears. "You're still a terrible cook?" "Worse than ever," he admitted, smiling. "I burned water last week. Actually burned it. The pot's probably still soaking." She laughed again, and the sound was like music, like hope, like coming home. "I have my car," he said softly. "We could drive back together, take the scenic route, stop at every ridiculous roadside attraction between here and Atlanta, talk about everything or nothing, whatever you want." Tessa looked at their joined hands, then up at the oak tree swaying above them. "I need to give notice at the diner," she said slowly. "Pack my things at Aunt Martha's." "I've got time," he said simply. "All the time you need." An hour later, after tearful hugs from her co-workers and promises to visit, they were on the road. Tessa's small suitcase sat in the back seat alongside Marcus's overnight bag. The highway stretched before them like a ribbon of possibilities. They talked as they drove, about the months apart, about their fears, about their hopes. They stopped at a roadside stand selling peaches, juice running down their chins as they laughed at each other's sticky fingers. They pulled over at a small lake just to watch the sunset paint the water gold. As darkness fell and Atlanta's lights appeared on the horizon, Marcus took a detour. "There's somewhere we need to go first," he said. The community kitchen was dark when they pulled up, but as soon as they stepped inside, lights flickered on. "Surprise!" voices called out. The staff had gathered, the women Tessa had trained, the volunteers she'd inspired, even Gloria standing there with tears in her eyes. Above them, the sign still glowed softly. Tessa's table. Tessa gripped Marcus's hand tightly as emotions overwhelmed her. "My family," she whispered. "Welcome home, baby," Gloria said, wrapping her in a warm embrace. As the others crowded around with hugs and questions and laughter, Tessa looked up at Marcus. Their eyes met in perfect understanding. This was where they belonged, not in spite of their scars and struggles, but because of them. Maybe. Tessa said softly, her voice full of wonder, "It's time to feed hope again." Marcus squeezed her hand in response, knowing that this time they would face whatever came together. No running, no hiding, no apologizing for the love they'd found in the most unexpected place. The autumn breeze carried the scent of gardenias through the open windows of the grand ballroom. Tessa stood before her mirror, smoothing down the front of her emerald green evening gown, not from a thrift store this time, but specially designed for her. Her fingers trembled slightly as she fastened the delicate pearl earrings Marcus had given her that morning. "You've got this," she whispered to her reflection. So much had changed since that first night when she'd walked into this same ballroom, clutching her life savings and desperate to be seen. A gentle knock at her door made her turn. Gloria stood there, beaming with pride. "Look at you, baby girl. You're glowing." "I'm nervous," Tessa admitted, fidgeting with her dress. "All those people who laughed at me last time, they'll be there again." Gloria crossed the room and took Tessa's hands in hers. "But you're not the same woman who walked in here a year ago. You're stronger now, loved now." Tears threatened to spill, and Gloria quickly dabbed at Tessa's eyes with a tissue. "None of that now. We spent too long on this makeup." A text message lit up Tessa's phone. "The car's waiting whenever you're ready. M." The drive to the hotel felt surreal. Streets she'd once walked anonymously now held memories. The corner where Marcus had first held her hand, the cafe where they'd shared countless lunch breaks, the park where they'd fed ducks on lazy Sunday afternoons. The hotel entrance was lined with photographers, their cameras flashing like stars. Tessa's heart raced as the car door opened, but then Marcus was there, tall and handsome in his tuxedo, extending his hand to help her out. "You look beautiful," he whispered, his grey eyes soft with admiration. "You cleaned up pretty nice yourself," she teased, trying to calm her nerves. They walked into the ballroom arm in arm. The same crystal chandelier sparkled overhead, but this time the whispers that followed them were different. Women smiled warmly, several approaching too, praised Tessa's work with the foundation. Men shook Marcus's hand, congratulating him on the kitchen's success. "Remember where you were standing?" Marcus asked softly, nodding toward a spot near the auction platform. Tessa smiled. "How could I forget? I thought my heart would burst right out of my chest when I raised my hand to bid. Best $1,200 anyone ever spent," he said, squeezing her hand. The evening progressed with dinner and speeches about various charitable initiatives. Tessa relaxed gradually, especially when she spotted Gloria at a nearby table, giving her encouraging winks. Then Marcus stood up, making his way to the podium. This wasn't unusual. He always spoke at these events. But something in his expression made Tessa's pulse quicken. "A year ago," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed room. "Many of you were in this very room for our annual charity auction. You witnessed something extraordinary, though few recognized it at the time." He paused, his eyes finding Tessa's across the room. "A woman bid her entire savings, $1,200, for one evening of my company. Some of you laughed, some whispered cruel words. But that woman, with her incredible courage and pure heart, gave me something priceless that night. She gave me faith again." The room was completely silent now. Tessa felt tears welling up as Marcus continued. "After losing my wife and daughter, I'd locked myself away from love, from hope, from genuine human connection. I ran my businesses. I donated money, but I wasn't truly living. Then Tessa Johnson walked into this ballroom and showed me what real courage looks like." He reached into his pocket, withdrawing an envelope. Tonight, I'm announcing a $10 million grant to expand Tessa's Table nationwide. What began as one community kitchen in Atlanta will become a network of hope across America, and there's only one person qualified to lead this initiative. Marcus's eyes found hers again. Tessa, would you join me up here? Her legs felt like jelly as she stood. Gloria gave her a gentle push, and somehow she found herself walking toward the stage. The same stage where she'd first shaken Marcus's hand a year ago, trembling with embarrassment as cameras flashed. As she climbed the steps, Marcus extended his hand, just as he had that first night. But this time, when their fingers intertwined, it felt like coming home. Ladies and gentlemen, Marcus announced, I'm honored to introduce the new director of the Reed Foundation's community initiative, Ms. Tessa Johnson. The applause started slowly, then built to a thunderous standing ovation. Tessa saw tears in several eyes, genuine smiles on faces that had once mocked her. But none of that mattered as much as the way Marcus was looking at her. He turned to face her fully, still holding her hand. The microphone caught his words as he said, You asked for one night. I'm asking for forever. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, but Tessa barely heard them. Her world had narrowed to Marcus's face, to the love and hope she saw there, to the future suddenly spreading out before them like a sunrise. Through happy tears, she whispered, Forever sounds perfect. The chandelier sparkled above them, casting rainbow lights across the room where their story had begun. But this time, there was no mockery, no judgment, no fear. There was only love, acceptance, and the beautiful certainty that sometimes one night really can last forever. Gloria's voice carried above the applause. That's my girl! Tessa laughed through her tears as Marcus pulled her into a warm embrace. Around them, the crowd continued to cheer, but they were lost in their own world, a world that had begun with a desperate bid for dignity and blossomed into something more beautiful than either of them could have imagined. Cameras flashed again, capturing this moment for tomorrow's papers. But unlike that first night, Tessa didn't feel exposed or vulnerable. She felt strong, loved, and exactly where she belonged. Ready to change more lives? Marcus asked softly. Tessa nodded, squeezing his hand. Together. The word echoed in her heart as they faced the crowd, their fingers intertwined, their futures forever linked by one remarkable night that had turned into a lifetime of love. The chandelier continued to sparkle overhead, witnessing another perfect moment in the room where miracles seemed to happen. But the real miracle wasn't in the grand gestures or public declarations. It was in the quiet certainty of two hearts that had found their way home to each other, against all odds and expectations. As they walked off the stage together, Tessa caught her reflection in a mirror. No longer the invisible woman she'd once been, but someone strong, valued, and deeply loved. She smiled, knowing that sometimes the greatest love stories begin with nothing more than courage, faith, and the willingness to be seen. 6 months after the gala, the garden behind Tessa's table bloomed with roses and hope. White chairs dotted the lawn where countless meals had been served to those in need. Now, this sacred space would witness another kind of nourishment, the joining of two hearts that had found each other in the most unexpected way. Tessa stood in the small office, smoothing her simple ivory dress. She'd chosen it not for its grandeur, but for how it made her feel. Beautiful, worthy, and entirely herself. Gloria adjusted the small bouquet of wildflowers in Tessa's hands, her eyes glistening with maternal pride. "Child," Gloria said, patting Tessa's cheek, "look how far you've come." Outside, Marcus waited beneath an arch of fresh flowers. Around his neck hung his late wife's wedding band on a silver chain, not as a weight of the past, but as a bridge to this new chapter. The gathered crowd was unlike any typical wedding party. Women from the shelter, children who'd found hope in warm meals, volunteers who'd become family. They sat together, all equal in this moment of joy. Gloria took her place at the front, her Bible worn and well-loved in her hands. As Tessa walked down the makeshift aisle, the setting sun painted everything in warm gold. Marcus's eyes never left her face, seeing not just the woman she was, but every step of the journey that had brought them here. "Love," Gloria began, her voice carrying across the garden, "doesn't come to the perfect. It perfects those it comes to." She smiled at the couple before her, living proof of her words. These two souls found each other not in spite of their scars, but because of them. They've shown us that healing happens when we dare to be seen, dare to see others, and dare to love again. When Marcus kissed his bride, there wasn't a dry eye in the garden. Even the toughest men, security guards and kitchen staff alike, wiped tears away without shame. It was impossible not to be moved by the pure joy radiating from the couple. True to their hearts, the reception wasn't a formal affair, but a community meal. Tessa and Marcus, still in their wedding attire, served homemade stew to their guests. Laughter and conversation flowed as freely as the food, everyone equal at these tables of love. As the golden sunset painted the sky in brilliant hues, Tessa leaned close to Marcus, their hands intertwined. "One night became forever, didn't it?" she whispered, remembering that first auction that had changed everything. Marcus smiled, his eyes full of tenderness. "And forever starts with dinner." The spring breeze carried the sound of children's laughter through the courtyard of Tessa's table's first location in Atlanta. A year had passed since the wedding, and the simple idea that began in one warehouse had blossomed into 37 community kitchens across America. Tessa stood at the window of her office, watching kids chase each other around the playground they'd built beside the kitchen. Marcus's warm presence appeared behind her, his hand finding its familiar place on her shoulder. "Remember when this was just an empty lot?" she asked, leaning back against him. "And now look at it." Marcus replied softly. From coast to coast, people know what Tessa's table means. Through the window, they watched as a young mother arrived with her 3 children, all of them wearing bright smiles. The family had been among their first guests, and now the mother worked as a kitchen supervisor, teaching others the skills she'd learned. "We started with hunger," Tessa reflected, her voice full of quiet wonder. "Not just for food, but hunger for love, dignity, and hope. Now we feed it every day." She paused, watching a little girl share her cookie with a younger child. And somehow, the more we give, the more we receive. That evening, Marcus surprised her with a reservation at the rooftop restaurant where they'd had their first dinner together. The city sparkled below them, but this time there were no cameras, no whispers, no judgment, just the peaceful glow of sunset and the warmth of shared love. The table was set exactly as it had been that first night, down to the fresh roses and crisp white tablecloth. But Tessa was different now, confident, serene, completely herself. Marcus was different too, his eyes soft with contentment rather than guarded with grief. As they finished their meal, Marcus reached across the table and took her hand. The same hand he'd held that first night, when neither of them knew they were beginning forever. He lifted his glass, the city lights dancing in his eyes. "You wanted one night," he said, his voice tender with memory. "You gave the world 1,000. Tessa smiled as tears glimmered in her eyes, catching the soft light of the candles. Their fingers intertwined across the table, wedding rings glinting. Below them, the city stretched out in a tapestry of twinkling lights, each one seeming to echo the quiet miracle of their love, a love that had grown from one night into a lifetime of giving, healing, and hope. Every light in the skyline seemed to tell their story, of two broken people who found wholeness in each other and then shared that healing with the world. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.